This edition of MacVoices is brought to you by Squarespace. Everything you need to create an exceptional website. Get your free trial and 10% off your new website at squarespace.com/MacVoices and use the discount code CHUCK. Welcome to Macvoices. This is the talk of the Mac community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, this time we're going to get into programming, iOS programming. Now, don't turn off yet, because we're not going to actually do the coding itself, although we may dig around a little in that. But we're going to talk about things from a little bit higher level and more from a user level, as in, what does all this programming stuff mean to you as an iOS user? For that, we have the author, well, Matt Neuburg writes books by the pound, I think, is... So this time he's got new programming books on iOS 7, and I want him to talk about why they end up being so big. Matt, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Oh, it's nice to be back again.
Yeah.
And we've done this for every edition of the book. And I thought I brought along copies so that just to remind people. So it all started back in the days of iOS 4. I should show it side on because it gets thicker each time you go through a new edition. So just so that the viewers have some pity on me, when I started writing this thing, it was called Programming iOS 3. Okay, iOS 4 hadn't been invented yet, and there was no such thing as an iPad. So I'm like in the middle of the book. I'm halfway through writing it, and all of a sudden, there's an iPad. It's like, oh, I'm going to have to take that into account. And then I'm still writing, and iOS 4 came out. So I'm like, okay, I guess we'll write it about iOS 4. And so then eventually we caught up. And then, of course, they came out with iOS 5. This is the iOS 5 version. Looks the same, except that it says 5. A little thicker, a little thicker. Okay, then we got to the iOS 6 version. This is the insane one. This is the one you can stun a buffalo if it's that big or what. And then then what they did was they said, all right, this is insane, which is correct. That was, wait, I'll tell you how many pages it is. 1,154 pages. So then they said, let's break it into 2 books, which actually is really cool because it's what I always wanted to do. So now what we've got is 2 separate books. So together it's more pages, but the result is that if you're a beginner and you really want the beginning part, it's much thinner and smaller. So and this is the volume about the Objective-C language and how to work in Xcode and basics of Cocoa. And then this is now we're in the heart of it. Now we're how do you make a view controller? How do you make a button? How do you make, things enter and leave the screen? How do you do animations? How do you produce sound and stuff like that? And that's thicker. So together it's like this. And look, they gave me a new animal. I've got this wonderful harp seal. Isn't that great? Fantastic.
Is there a hidden meaning with the harp seal?
I have no idea. You're not really allowed to inquire. O'Reilly has a person whose job it is to pick out the animal that goes on the cover of an O'Reilly book. And her job title is the Animal Goddess. Okay. Isn't that a wonderful job title?
Yeah, I think. While you have it, I'm not sure how it's going to play on the resume, though.
I think it plays great on the resume. So anyway, so now and so iOS 7 has been out for a while, and I'm sure that we've got lots of viewers who have been using it. And so, what I'm hoping is we'll talk a little about, what does iOS 7 mean to developers, in the sense, what does iOS 7 mean, for you? Because what can developers now give you that they couldn't give you before? And there are some things. Not a lot. A lot of programming is simply, what am I allowed to say to the system? What does the system give me? And what can I, as a programmer? So some of the improvements are deep under the hood. I'll give you an example. an iOS program that downloads something. That's been done in the same way, it downloads like a file off the internet or a picture, just a picture to display it. Well, the way that you gave the commands for downloading that picture were the same in iOS 4, 5, and 6. Well, they're improved in iOS 7. That has absolutely nothing to do with anything tangible, But then when I say that iOS 7 has a vastly improved capability to download something in the background, even while the program is not running, then that's a system feature that may affect users. If you use like a newsstand program like the New York Times, that's what they're doing. So that every time you fire up the New York Times, the latest news has already been downloaded. And it's like, how did that happen? I never refreshed. And the answer is, well, it's because there's a new capability in iOS 7 that allows that kind of thing to be done in the background. But like I say, a lot of the stuff is just linguistic. But then there's some stuff that's actually visible.
Matt, it's something I think that a lot of us as average users, when you're out at the mall or at dinner or whatever, and you want your phone to do something, or your iPad, you don't always fully appreciate the fact that it may not be the program's fault. And I'm not suggesting it's even it's iOS's fault. It's just, it's not a capability that's baked in or built in yet, or it may not be implemented as effectively as we might like. And that's something that I think the developers get tagged with some things, Apple gets tagged with others, and it really, the fault just may be that it's not quite developed yet. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, or it's developed in a way that doesn't quite do what the developer needs. I'll give you a specific example. As you know, some of your music can be in the cloud. Let's say you have iTunes Match. So you might have some things that are on the device and some things that are not on the device. Well, Apple doesn't allow the developer to distinguish very well between things that are in the cloud and things that are on the device. Yes, there's a way the developer can ask that question, but the answer that comes back is not always quite correct in the way that you would expect. So it's not drawing the distinction. And I have a bug report in on this, saying, I'm not getting the information that I need. So I saw a music playing program where I went to their website, and there was a frequently asked questions thing, and there was a frequently asked question right on their website that said, you're not drawing a distinction between, you're just listing all the music, including the stuff that's in iTunes Match in the cloud. Why are you listing that when I'm not showing that in the music program, but your program is listing it? And their answer is, we can't quite get the information that we need in order to know whether it's on your device or not. So that's an example. That kind of thing does happen a lot. On the other hand, developers are unbelievably ingenious and will work their way around things in order to bring you a better experience. A good example is the little slidey switch that is just a little widget that can appear on the screen. It's either on or off. And developers have long disliked how you can't really customize that. So they build their own, they roll their own. You'll see switches that are it's their own drawing, and that way they can put words on it. They can be all kinds of different colors and things like that. And what happens is that Apple then sort of follows along later. They'll look and see what developers are doing, and they're like, oh, this is something a lot of developers want. And then they'll make it officially possible to customize the colors or to add words to it. And then they'll take that away again if they feel like. So, you just never know what Apple's going to do. It's like having a big gorilla in bed. It does what it wants to do, and you just sort of roll with it.
But sometimes don't the developers they step over bounds. And that's one thing that Apple just won't allow. They slap them down hard because Apple is so intent on controlling the experience. And it's interesting to hear you say that Apple follows the developer lead, because I seldom get that impression. I get the impression from developers that they're always being forced to follow Apple's leads and take what Apple doles out and never cross the line.
They certainly are. They are to some extent, but it is also true that every year at WWDC, Apple, which is the big meeting for developers, where Apple sort of reveals what's coming for the next year. Apple always does say, we heard you ask for so and so, and it's clear that they do. I'll give an example from iOS 7. It's much more of the color scheme is now customizable, and this is something that the developers push for, like the little switch that I'm talking about. For a long time, it could only come in one color. Now more and more of it can be customized. Other examples are not occurring to me, but it does happen all the time that they see what. They see the ways that developers are trying to cheat their way around the limitations that you're talking about. And sometimes they relent and actually give them a way to do it. And I'll show you an example. So an example is the widget called an alert view. It's just a little thing that comes up with text and a message like, do you really want to delete this file? Yes, no. That's it. Well, developers always want to add things to that little view, and it's not legal to add those things. And they found all kinds of ways. Like what they do is they pick apart the view in code and find their way down into it and add subviews, and then Apple will clamp down and they'll say, no, you can't do that. So like in iOS 4, you'd have a trick for getting down there, and in iOS 5, Apple will break that trick. But it's just like any form of security. Developers will then find their way in again. I do not advocate this sort of thing. I'm just telling you what developers actually do. Well, in iOS 7, what Apple has done is provide a way where you can make a view that floats over a small part of the screen in exactly the way that an alert view does. And I'll show you an example. Like that. That looks like an alert view, but it's not an alert view. It's something that I made, but it's behaving exactly like an alert view. It's faded out the rest of the screen, but you can still see the rest of the screen, just like an alert view. And it's sort of round, and it's got, and and then I can make it go away again by clicking this little OK button, and it goes away in the same way as an alert view. What I'm using there is a feature, custom animation transition, which allows me to simulate an alert view. Now, I think that the thing that I've just described, although it might sound very small to you, is the most important thing in iOS 7 from a developer point of view. The ability to float a smaller view easily. It's more technical than that, Chuck. It's not just any view. It's a view controlled by a view controller. Never mind what that means. But the fact that you can, there used to be a rule that said the only way you can show a view controlled by a view controller is to replace the whole screen with it. Now what you can do is you can float it in front of what's already there. And that's what it is that I just showed. So it may seem like a little thing, but it makes a big difference to what developers are going to be able to do legally, because they can just take out and roll their own legally as part of the stuff that they're given. I'll give you another example. Have you used the calendar app a lot? You know how that has those funny transitions where you tap like a day name, and the whole thing sort of zooms out to show that day, and then you zoom away, you go back into a week, you go back into a month, and there's this zoom effect. That is all because of the same custom transitions feature. What's happening there is there's a thing called a navigation controller. And what used to happen is whenever you have a navigation controller system, you're pushing view controllers onto the navigation controller. And there used to be only one animation for that. Comes in from the right. And then when you're done with it, it goes out to the left. There'll be a back button up in the corner, and you tap the back button, goes back out. Right? I mean, that's familiar. Well, now when you go through the view controller transition, you can supply your own animation. And that's what Apple is doing in the calendar. sameness in the way you navigate from screen to screen is going to be gone. Instead of everything happening exactly the same way, you tap, thing comes in from the right, say back, thing slides away to the right, and you're back to where you were. Instead of that, developers are going to be able to come up with all kinds of animations that'll be completely different and completely original. I think that's absolutely wonderful. And I think that's actually the most visible thing that end users will see in iOS 7, aside from the complete redesign. You know what I mean? I mean, as you know, buttons don't look like buttons anymore. They just look like text. They've taken away the roundy outside. There's a lot of stylistic stuff that has changed. But I'm talking about, technological differences. So, I actually think that's an extremely original and interesting thing for Apple to have done. They've made it easier for developers to make their apps different from one another. Instead of that same old slide in from the left, slide out to the right.
Matt, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I can absolutely see from a creative standpoint, and maybe even from a practical standpoint, why this could be really exciting for a developer. I'm also getting a little bit different sense, though, as to why it, I don't know if I'm going to say it presents challenges, but it makes the interface more robust. It also makes it theoretically a little more confusing, perhaps, because people have now, to take your example and simplify it, they used to always come in from the left. Now they can come in from the right, the left, the top, and the bottom. Okay, so now I've got, 3 ways or 4 ways they can come instead of one. And that, I'm wondering, is that a good idea? Is this a good example of where Apple exerts control, or in this case has given up a little control, but perhaps at the sacrifice of consistency?
Well, I'm on your side.
Wow.
I don't know where most programmers or even users stand on this, but I'm not a great fan of many of these changes that have come down in iOS 7. If you got a panel together to critique iOS 7, the first thing people are going to focus on is this very same thing that I just talked about a minute ago. Buttons don't look like buttons anymore. It used to be that I could say, tap the button, and the button was skeuomorphic. In iOS 6, 5, 4, 3, a button was a thing. It didn't have to, but most of the time it was sort of a roundy thing with a little shading that really suggested that you were tapping a physical button. Now, what Apple wants you to do and what they give you is just the word or the picture. So when you first look at it, you can't distinguish between, is this something that I'm supposed to read or something that I'm supposed to tap? Now, those are 2 very different widgets in under the hood. One of them is called a label, the thing you're supposed to read, and the other is called a button, the thing you're supposed to tap. But now, on the surface, if it's just a word or 2, a label and a button look exactly the same as one another, and you don't know whether you're supposed to read this or tap it. You don't know that something is tappable automatically. Well, I think that's a poor choice. I don't know whether that's whether you watch the keynote speech for WWDC, but that was what they were going on about Johnny Ive coming in and redesigning everything. And it's like, look, redesign is good, but you're not redesigning in a way that's really sympathetic with your users, especially your older users like me who are having a little trouble seeing the screen anyway. I find the new typeface. They said we have this new dynamic type. It's much more legible. I don't think it's much more legible. I have much more trouble reading the screen than I used to because of this thin sans serif that they're using for everything now. A good example is just the interface of the 9 buttons when you make a call, when you have to dial a call by actually tapping the numbers on the phone app. I can't see the numbers anymore because it's just these little thin circles and these little thin numbers. And it used to be a great big honking button in your face, like a physical phone with buttons on it. I think that's a mistake. I think they've thrown away skeuomorphism to the point where they've made it hard to see. But that's just my opinion. Maybe I'm just being a stick in the mud. People have trouble with change. I think for developers, I want to go back just for a second to the question that you asked about what these changes mean. What these changes mean is my book gets bigger, okay? Because no, seriously, and for developers it means, okay, in addition to everything else I have to know, now I have to know this, right? So it used to be you pushed the view controller onto the navigation controller, and the thing slid automatically in from the right, and you didn't have to think about anything else. Now you have to think to yourself, oh, do I want to add a custom transition here? How do I do that? One more thing to know. Well, on the one hand, this is what developers do, but on the other hand, every time Apple comes out with a new system, it means there's all this new stuff that developers have to suck up, and absorb. And that's why the books keep getting bigger. It's not because I have more to say. It's because Apple keeps expanding the fundamental set of things that developers need to be able to know how to do.
But that's not a bad thing, because it also means that there are a lot more things that they can do, and it leads to more robust apps and more capable apps. But I'm really intrigued by your comments about the skeuomorphism. First of all, I get the leather stitching thing. I get why that annoyed a lot of people. I've never understood, though, why there was just this huge backlash against a button that looked like a button. I mean, now you're right. Everything is flat, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's just, I think there's a place for a button, and a place for a label, and it would have been lovely if we could have kept that, but there are times in certain parts of the interface, I feel like that maybe usability was sacrificed at the hand of design.
And what you said earlier applies here too. When it becomes easier to do something very original, then you don't know from app to app how things are going to work. And unless you're adventurous and keep tapping things, you won't find out. And some people are not adventurous. I always use the example of my mother. And then she watches these videos later, Chuck, and she's really annoyed. She's like, oh, you talked about me again. You always use me as an example, But,
hello, Mrs. Neuburg.
but it really does happen that when you get one of these major system changes, like from iOS 6 to iOS 7, I have to re-explain to her how her favorite apps now work. Again, the New York Times is a good example. I think the way the New York Times app works now is great. I think those guys are brilliant. They've really come up with a great new interface. But it's a great new interface that takes some learning. It's quite different than what the previous interface was like. So you just have to be willing to try stuff, to tap around and see, is this a button? Is this a tappable thing? What happens if I do this? I think a lot of people were thrown by the calendar app for that reason. They didn't realize, they didn't realize how you're navigating from place to place. But I also think people get used to it. I agree with you on the one hand, and the new look of iOS 7, especially in the beginning, it just drove me crazy. And of course, there were all those complaints of motion sickness, because the motion control thing. But on the other hand, people get used to anything. And, I'm sure that Apple is just going, yeah, you wait until iOS 8. Everyone's going to be saying, iOS 7, I was used to that. It was great.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I don't want to sound like a curmudgeon or that I'm resisting change, but there are times, and I'm thinking one particular app where I need to hit a slider, and the slider now is so small, and the thumb on the slider is so small that I have trouble actually hitting it.
Yeah.
And if it, were 10 pixel by 10 pixel, I'd have no trouble grabbing it and moving it wherever I want. But as it is, I got to, hit it, and nope, that didn't do it. That didn't. Okay, finally on the third try, I get it. And that's the kind of thing that bugs me a little bit.
That's very badly done. And are you talking about the music app on the lock screen? Because it's like that. When you're playing music and you're in the lock screen and you just fire the thing up so you can just see the lock screen. There's that slider showing where you are in the song. And let's suppose you want to slide back. You see this little tiny thin thing, and you're supposed to slide that. And you can't really slide it because the whole lock screen is now slidable. So you try to slide the little slider, and instead the whole lock screen slides to open the lock screen. It's like, no, that's not what I was trying to do. All I wanted to do was slide the slider. And that's a big mistake. It's like the left hand wasn't talking to the right hand. And this seems to me more and more of a problem. I've talked about this to you before. As the system gets bigger, as the system grows, as Apple grows, it's like nobody's putting all this stuff together and saying, do all these pieces of the puzzle make sense?
And that is not the app I was talking about, but it's a perfect example of exactly what I meant. That usability, sure. I mean, it's cool. It's a thin little line, and that's great. That's all you need is a visual cue. But it's more than a visual cue, and it's supposed to be usable, and that's a problem.
Right. And it's hard to believe that nobody noticed this. It's like, didn't anybody test this? Can't they tell? Don't they use this? Don't they use this themselves? Now we'll see if anything changes in iOS 7.1. I can't reveal all that I've seen in iOS 7.1. It's at the moment that we're talking, it is still in beta and has been in beta for quite a long time. It's on the 4th seed. But even I have not looked at iOS 7.1 on a device. All I've looked at is iOS 7.1 in the simulator. In other words, I've looked at it from a developer's point of view, but I haven't actually taken a beta of iOS 7.1 and loaded it onto my device because I don't want to be stuck with that. I don't want to be stuck with a beta on the device. I need this device. I need to be able to use it. If something goes wrong, it's hard to go backwards once you've loaded the beta on there. Yeah. So I haven't actually tried it. But, the rumor sites say that Apple has noticed some of these problems and has made certain things clearer or easier or whatever. So we'll see if that particular one changes. Only time will tell.
This edition of Mac Voices is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform that makes it fast and easy to create your own professional website or online portfolio. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com and use the discount code CHUCK. That's my first name, Chuck. I have lots of problems. I bet you have lots of problems too. That's why I like products and services that either solve problems or are never a problem to start with. And that's why you want to build your site with Squarespace. What problems does a Squarespace site solve? First, you don't have to know a thing about website design. You start with a template that looks great, then customize it to make it look the way you want it to look. Not a lick of code required. Just click here, drag there, pick over here, select over there, and you've got a custom site that is yours. Problem solved. Second, there's that little matter of photos. Sure, you can resize the photos for your site to make them fit, but that's a problem. It takes time, and you have to have multiple versions to accommodate multiple screen sizes. Not with Squarespace. Just upload your photo, and Squarespace automatically takes care of the sizing so your photo looks great at whatever size it needs to be to look great. Problem solved. Third, your site needs to look good on desktops, phones, and tablets. Sure, you could build 3 different sites, but that's a problem. Squarespace automatically delivers your site optimized to the device it is being viewed on. It's all part of the Squarespace package. Problem solved. Fourth, you want to sell stuff from your website. And setting up e-commerce can be tough because there's so many moving parts. Accepting payments, collecting the money, and lots more. Squarespace makes it painless. You can start the process of setting up your e-commerce with Squarespace's tools and services at 9 a.m. and be done by 10 a.m. That's lots of time left over before lunch. Problem solved. There are lots of other problems that Squarespace solves. You might not even realize how they solve them because they never surfaced in the first place. And that's my kind of service. Because I need to deal with all the other problems in my life. Don't ask. Get a 14-day trial of Squarespace to see how it will solve your website problems, and then solve another problem by getting 10% off your first purchase with the code CHUCK. That's 10% off your problem-solving Squarespace site with the code CHUCK. Squarespace. everything you need to create an exceptional website. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this edition of MacVoices. Matt, I like to joke with you, but seriously, your books are seen as the gold standard for iOS programming. Given the fact that you are writing the gold standard books, and there are going to be choices that Apple makes and everybody makes that you and I might not agree with on an individual basis, but overall, do you feel like we're seeing a positive move forward in iOS as far as capabilities and building for the future, or have we taken a left turn and maybe not made much forward progress?
I like some things very much. Apple is good at adding little capabilities that are a real pleasure and allow the developer to do, add small but nice touches. There's a new thing in iOS 7 called UIKit Dynamics, and all it is an expansion of, I'll actually show it to you. It's an expansion of the kind of animation that you can do. Okay, so here we have a little ball. Actually, it's a picture of Mars. And I'll press this little start button, and what you're going to see happen is the ball is going to fall to the bottom of the screen, and it's going to bounce, and it's going to start rolling as it bounces, and it's going to bounce right off the screen. Very, very simple. Here we go. That's it. That's all there is to it. But that would be incredibly difficult to do. I mean, this is a physics simulation. The thing bounced and it started rolling in a very naturalistic steps. Well, that's a wonderful little thing. I'm sure a whole section of Apple worked on this. UIKit Dynamics, that's called. So they've expanded the kind. All it is an expansion of the kind of animation that you can easily add to give a little extra zip or pizzazz to some moment in your app. And if you're writing some little game app or even a non-game app where you need to transition from one thing to another, that's great. But this is something, as I say, that Apple is really great at. Now let me say what I think Apple is not great at. They're not great at standing back and saying, let's look at where we're going here. Let's look at all the pieces of the puzzle. Does all of this make sense together? And I've given this example to you before, and I give it again. I have a long-standing bug report in on the fact that there's a wonderful new way that Apple introduced in iOS 6 of laying out your interface so that as the interface size changes, all the pieces move into place. And that's important because you've got devices of two different sizes now. Even if you're just running on iPhone, you don't know whether you're going to run on a 3.5-inch screen or a 4-inch screen. So if the same app starts up on a 3.5-inch screen, it's as if the entire window got compressed. And if it starts up on the 4-inch screen, it's as if that window got expanded. Well, all the buttons and all the labels and everything like that, they've all got to expand or contract together in a way that makes sense for that size of the screen. So Apple has a thing called auto layout that really helps with that. It's terrific. And it's much better in iOS 7 than it was in iOS 6. It's much easier to set up auto layout. It's great. But there's one little problem. If you do any animation while auto layout is turned on, auto layout fights you and tries to put the thing that you're animating back where it was. So auto layout, the way that I put this is to say view transitions and auto layout are enemies. And I think that's the name of the bug that I submitted. And it's like nobody stopped to say, wait, we've got a problem here. And then you look at the WWDC example code, because in the example that I just gave, the UIKit Dynamics example, there wasn't any problem. The ball came down and it bounced and it rolled and it bounced off the screen. And you're like, well, you're not having any trouble animating that. That's right, but auto layout is not running in that interface. There's no auto layout. If I had been using auto layout, it would have gotten in my way and messed everything up. And that's exactly what Apple does. If you look at Apple's examples, you're like, how are they able to do this? Oh, they cheated. They're not solving the problem that view animation and auto layout don't go together. If they want to show you view animation in action, they turn auto layout off. That's not a solution. They're just avoiding the problem. And that's what I'm giving you is a small example of what I think is the overarching issue. Right? This is what you asked me. I feel like there needs to be consolidation. There needs to be a moment when you say, wait, is all of this hanging together logically, structurally? And instead of that happening, instead of that consolidation happening, it's just getting bigger. More pieces are being added. It's growing by accretion, not by evolution.
But, okay, so I'll play devil's advocate.
Fine.
I don't know how prevalent is that bug. And what I mean by that is how often does it show up? Because we all know that there's some bugs that affect, let's just say, 1 in 100,000 users, as opposed to a bug that affects 1 in 1,000 users. Well, you're going to fix the one that affects 1 in 1,000 users a whole lot faster. So are there bugs that you're talking about that maybe as a purist you're hung up on, or that you see that don't affect everybody?
Do I look like the kind of guy who gets hung up on stuff? Yes, actually I do.
Yes, you do.
Well, I'll give you an indication of how big this bug is. Okay. I like to hang out on a website called Stack Overflow. You know about Stack Overflow?
I do.
It is a website where developers can ask questions, and other developers, usually within about 30 seconds, jump in with answers. And somebody asked a question about this very thing. They said, how do you deal with view animation in a situation where you've got auto layout going? I'm trying to make this happen and it keeps jumping back because of auto layout. And I wrote a little essay. That answer has gotten 350 upticks. My reputation on Stack Overflow is 38,000 now, not least because of 1 or 2 or maybe 10 answers that I've given over the last year or two, and that is one of the main answers. Well, that tells me a lot of people are banging into this problem.
Okay, so, and that's it. I'm playing devil's advocate here, and I really don't have a right to because I don't know. But well, I see your point about what's happening and why the books are getting bigger.
Okay, but let's talk about small things. All right, I'll show you another running example. Let me switch over here. Now I'm going to show you this example twice. First, I'm going to show you running in iOS 6. This is how it used to work. Now, what you're seeing here is an ordinary, if it ever starts up, what you're seeing here is an ordinary. It's called a text view. Text view is a scrollable place where the user can read and edit text. Now, it's taking up the whole screen. So what's going to happen if I click at the bottom of the screen is the keyboard's going to come up from the bottom. But wait a minute. The place that I clicked where I want to work, the place I tapped, is at the bottom of the screen. And the keyboard's about to cover that. Well, it doesn't matter because, as you see, when I tap, the whole thing automatically rises, and there you can see the blinking cursor point. The text view has compensated for the presence of the keyboard by compressing itself and bringing the place where I tapped up above the top of the keyboard. And as I work, if I type more at that place, I'm typing now, right? See, I got to the next line and it scrolled automatically. That's in iOS 6. The widget that we're looking at here, Chuck, this is a common widget. People need to be able to type lengthy text, okay? Now, I'm going to run the very same code in iOS 7. So I'll switch the simulator to iOS 7 and I'll launch exactly the same project again. And I'm going to show you that it doesn't work. So that Apple had what I'm trying to impress upon you here is that Apple had a widget the text view it's called, here it is. They had a widget that was working for three generations, iOS 3, iOS 4, iOS 5, iOS 6, that's 4 generations. Then it stopped working. Okay, so here we go. So I'll tap down at the bottom. I'll tap right here. Here we go. And there comes the keyboard. Looks very different in iOS 7, of course. And nothing happened to the scroll position. So they've taken something that was just fine and they've broken it. Well, that makes it very, very difficult for developers. Well, I mean, what are developers supposed to do under those circumstances? Now, in my book, I do suggest a workaround, but it was very difficult to find, and it's kind of hacky, and I shouldn't have to do it. And I've got a bug in on this, and iOS 7 has been out for how long now, and Apple hasn't fixed it. And they haven't fixed it in the beta. I mean, I don't think I'm telling you anything I'm not allowed to tell you when I say the thing I just showed you in the simulator is iOS 7.1 seed 4, and it's not fixed there. Every time they put out a new, it's like I test it, fixed it. But this is a fundamental flaw. So you can say it's very small, but it means if I'm a developer whose app has a text view in it, which is extraordinarily probable if I want you to be able to type any text of any length, I've got to go, halfway around the moon to make this thing usable. I shouldn't have to do that. How could they release iOS 7 in that condition? They knew there was a problem. There were these developer forums. So during the whole alpha beta period, there are these developer forums where people who have access to the alphas and the betas, they're testing things, they're saying what the problems are, they're submitting bugs. No, they pushed ahead on the schedule. This is what I mean by not pausing to consolidate.
But at some point, here we go. But at some point you have to ship. At some point you have to say, it's good enough. It's not perfect, but it works. And frankly, iOS 7 may not be the most stable version of the iOS that I've run, but it certainly serves me, well about 97% of the time. That's me. That may not be you.
Well, you're right. You can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And as Steve Jobs famously said, real artists ship. But there's a middle ground between sitting on the thing forever and releasing too soon. Look, we saw this with iOS 6. I don't have to remind you what happened with the Maps app. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
And this was not an unknown problem. Everybody saw this coming, and they were all screaming. But somehow the message didn't get up to the top levels. So then iOS 6 was released. The Maps app was a disaster. Everybody started making fun of it, and Tim Cook had to make a big speech. And I'm like, Tim, you're in charge of this company. You telling me that nobody told you this problem was there? Because all the developers were trying to tell you.
Yeah, well, somebody lost their job over that, I think.
Yeah. But the problem is the guy who's supposed to be providing the adult supervision at the top was not informed that there was a serious issue here. Yeah. And yet, anybody who looked at the developer forums would have known there was a serious issue. So what I'm saying is there's a happy medium. If they'd thought more, if they'd waited a few months, look, it wouldn't have killed anybody. There's some circumstances where it's better to wait a month or 2 or 3 or 4 and get these issues straightened out. But Apple is on this, one new system a year schedule, and they're not letting themselves deviate from it. And I think, although this is outside my bailiwick, I think Mavericks has the same kind of problem. I think there are things in Mavericks that are just not finished, and they shipped anyway.
I can't. I mean, how do you argue with that? Because there's evidence of it in various places. But still, I guess I'm not ready to sit in judgment of that. Now, I'd be very happy to sit in judgment if it affected something that was key to something that I needed to do. But on the other hand, if there's something that's key that I need to do, then I need to stick with Mountain Lion until Mavericks Mountain Lion. No, Lion. Whatever. I've lost track now of the cats.
I was right.
Yeah. I'll stick with what works until something does get updated. But Matt, there are times, though, you look at the number of lines of code. I mean, I look at your book, or books now, that are teaching me how to program in iOS 7. There are times I wonder that it works at all. That, it's almost amazing that it does.
Well, what you're saying is actually quite profound, because that is the wonder of modern programming. It's all systems built on systems, built on systems, built on systems. And the fact that you're able to do the stuff that you want to do, and it somehow gets down to the level of the processor and the screen and makes all those things happen, it's absolutely amazing. And it's also extremely satisfying. I'm not someone who makes big commercial apps. I've written a couple of games. I've written a couple of completely practical things for myself, but I really enjoy them. I mean, just writing a simple game, a child mind level game, being able to tap that thing and make stuff move around and stuff, it's fantastic. I remember when the iPad first came out, and I think we had a Mac jury about it. And I said, I'm pretty sure I said this to you at the time. If we had this back when I was teaching, Greek and Latin, I used to be a Greek and Latin college professor. The stuff I would have written for my students. They could have all been toting it around right there on this little light, flat, easily usable, portable, backlit, 10-hour memory, 10-hour battery, object. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And I think that, that we often forget what a miracle all this stuff is. And also, I should say, in my books, I try to stay positive. I don't rant. But if something is a clear bug, I have a duty to my readers to say, this is not working like it should. This is breakage with respect to iOS 6. If you had code that was working in iOS 6, it will now break unless you take measures. In the example that I just showed, that's what's happening. This is code. There's not even any code, really. There's just a text view filled with some text. And the user taps, and this is what happens. The screen, the keyboard comes up, but the text view scrolls so that the place that the user tapped is visible above the top of the keyboard. It's been like that in iOS 3, iOS 4, iOS 5, iOS 6, not in iOS 7. And yes, I give a workaround, but you shouldn't have to work around it. I shouldn't have to jump up and down and say, you had code that works, and now it doesn't work. I think that's terrible. That's what testing is for. And it worries me that Apple is not doing the kind of testing that they need to do.
Matt, let's wrap up, though, with what you were saying. It's someplace I wanted to get to for people that are, and especially kids that are looking at starting to program and wanting to program. It is kind of a magical thing to learn how to control the device, to make the device do what you want it to do. Now, there's a long road to get to, say, a road racing game, from the very start of programming. But where would you tell a kid, a young person, somebody that just wants to start getting involved in programming? Are your books a good place to start, or is that a little bit deep?
I don't know what age person can use my books. I do know that I've had emails from people who say, I'm using your books in a classroom situation. And that's exactly what I want done with them. The way that I write is, it's modeled after Euclid and geometry. Euclid says, let's start at the very beginning. Okay, there's a line, there's a point. I'm going to tell you the basic rules. Okay, now I'm going to prove a theorem based on those basic rules. Now I'm going to prove a theorem based on that theorem. Now I'm going to prove a theorem based on the previous two theorems. And he just builds up the entirety of geometry. My book tries to do that. I try to start right at the beginning. I teach you C, which is not the language that you're mostly using. You're using Objective-C. But Objective-C is based on C. So first I teach you C. Then I teach you object-oriented programming. I teach you Objective-C. Then I teach you how to use Xcode. Then I teach you features of the Cocoa framework that affect the Objective-C language that are important to know about. Then I teach you about views. views, how to make sure that, how to detect that they've been touched, how to draw in them. Then I teach you about how to animate them. Then I teach you about view controllers. Can't tell you about view controllers until I've taught you about views. And then I teach you about certain kinds of view controllers, scroll views. Okay, certain kind of scroll view, table view. Oh, everyone wants to use a table view. So I mean, I build it up and build it up. So I am trying to make this a narrative that shows, the discovery, the learning process from the ground up. I don't know whether kids can use it. However, I want to go back to the premise of your question. If kids show the slightest interest in programming, if kids are using their devices and they're going, I wonder if I could do this, please, parents, teachers, encourage them to do it. Find a way. There's children's programming languages. There's a thing that's out of MIT called Scratch, which allows people to program in a very simple visual way, without having to learn some special language. It's just a purely visual language where you just move things around. But in my belief, programming, and you heard it here first, maybe not first, programming is the new Latin. Right? I used to be a classics professor, and everyone's like, well, why would you learn Latin? You read what the Romans did. Who cares what the Romans did? Well, it trains the mind. And that's why people learned Latin, for hundreds of years. It was part of the curriculum because it teaches you logical thinking. The thinking skills that are involved in writing even a simple program. The logical organization, the precise expression. You say something wrong and your program won't even compile. Or if it compiles, but you said something wrong, it might do something very, very unexpected. You've got to express yourself with 100% accuracy and 100% logic. You have to turn yourself into Mr. Spock from Star Trek. You've got to ruthlessly pare down what it is that you want to do. It's fantastic. That's why I, who used to be, a classics professor and who loved nothing more than, reading Cicero or Plato in the original, that's why I love programming. I'm exercising exactly the same part of my brain. It feels like there's no people say, a classicist, how did a classicist become a programmer? No. A classicist is a programmer. It's exactly the same mental exercise. Trust me on this. And I think that to create a generation of programming illiterates, when we now have this wonderful ability, would be a terrible shame. I think this is a great way to train the mind. So I am tremendously in favor of teaching programming in the schools from very early on. I think it should be part of the curriculum. I think it should be, you're probably never going to use calculus. I mean, I've forgotten all my calculus. We could be spending that same time programming, and it would be just as good for your mind, and you might use it.
I think we need to leave it right there because I think that's a heck of a great point. And it's one I don't think I've ever heard it expressed exactly like that, comparing classical study to programming. But it makes a huge amount of sense, and you're right about the precision and the logic and the cause and effect, and that does seem to be something that's lost in a lot of cases in education today, at least from where I sit, and I don't sit anywhere in that world, but you do sometimes have to wonder.
And programming gives you something. As you said yourself when you posed me this question, it gives you something that Latin does not. I mean, when you successfully read a sentence of Latin, you have just discovered that the Gauls have continued to march into Italy. I mean, great. But when you successfully do something with an iOS program, you tap something and the thing moves. Oh my gosh. I mean, you get a dopamine charge from this. And I'm not making that up. No. When I write a little program and I struggle with it, it doesn't work, and then I finally get it, and then I tap the thing over and over again because it's doing it. It's really like somebody put a dime in your mental slot. You really get feedback. You get a reward. It's just like a rabbit being given a rabbit pellet. You're so happy. It's fantastic. So it's got its own attraction. It's got its own yes, no. It's not the Latin teacher saying, no, I'm telling you translated the sentence wrong. No. The iOS device is telling you whether you got it right. When you got it right, it's really right. So obviously programming is a wonderful way to train the mind because it has its own meaningful, positive feedback system built right in.
Matt, you make me want to go and get the books and start to learn to program.
Well, good. Let me know when you've written your first app.
Okay. Yeah, it'll be a little while, but I'll get there. Hey, Matt, it's great to see you. Thank you. I think you've stretched our understanding and our thinking a little bit. It's always fascinating and really appreciated. And on behalf of all the programmers out there, thank you for writing, what they are saying is the gold standard for iOS programming.
Well, I really appreciate your having me. I love coming back each time there's a new version of iOS and talking about what's happened. I don't know how much longer this can. They're getting thicker and bigger and books. I mean, sheesh, is this really? This seems like so 20th century. But as long as O'Reilly will let me, I'll keep doing this, and we'll keep talking about it.
And every time you do, we'll come back here.
It'd be great.
Good to see you, Matt. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Folks, that's Matt Neuburg. I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Get out there and program and encourage programming in your schools. It will benefit the kids. It'll benefit you. It'll benefit everyone. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for links, show notes, to subscribe, to connect with Chuck on Twitter, app.net, Google+, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Subscribe to our weekly newsletter, the MacVoices Dispatch, to stay up to date with all the latest MacVoices news from our front page or at MacVoices.com/newsletter. Advertising and sponsorships handled by Backbeat Media at BackbeatMedia.com.